There has been a downward trend over the last decade in trust in universities, largely around the politics and the cost.
I think universities kind of moved towards the idea they were doing big things in the world and they were sort of entitled to the money.
I do support that broader effort of holding universities accountable, that you're not discriminating on the basis of race in admissions or hiring.
People are angry that they're economically stuck. You want to unstick the average American, offer them free or low price, high quality higher education.
Hey, it's Julie, and this is Top of Mind, where we tackle tough topics with nuance and an open mind. We're out to become better citizens, kinder neighbors, and more effective advocates.
Government at all levels invests about $500 billion in higher education. That works out to about $1,700 a year out of pocket for the average taxpayer.
So this is Paul Glastris. He's editor-in-chief of Washington Monthly Magazine, which has for decades published college rankings that take more than prestige and exclusivity into account.
Whether you never went to college or whether you're through with college and have paid off your loans, if you're the average taxpayer, right? The government is spending this money on behalf of the average taxpayer because we think higher education is worth it.
What are we talking about specifically here? Pell Grants, state funding that comes out of the general fund and goes into state schools?
Both those things. Tax expenditures, right? Little to nothing that colleges do gets taxed. That's a benefit. Billions in research dollars that flow from primarily the federal government into colleges. All the money that colleges build up in their endowments that's not taxed. So it's a huge investment.
And the question is, are we getting our money's worth? Well, most Americans right now say no. Just 42% of people surveyed by Gallup in the summer of 2025 said they have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in U.S. universities. Now, people with low confidence most often cited concerns about political agendas, high tuition, and colleges just not preparing students well for the workforce. During his second term, President Donald Trump has used federal funds as leverage to press universities, especially the Ivy League schools, to root out anti-Semitism, eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and address what the administration sees as liberal indoctrination on campuses. Here was the president in April 2025 calling out Harvard in particular with a nod to Education Secretary Linda McMahon.
She's very upset with Harvard. They have $53 billion in a fund, and yet they want more grants. And it looks like we're not going to be giving them any more grants, right, Linda? And, a grant is at our discretion, and they're really not behaving well, so it's too bad.
The Trump administration also terminated more than $700 million in research grants to universities all across the country for projects covering DEI, transgender health, and COVID. The legality of that move is still working its way through the courts. But higher education has not escaped criticism from the political left either, though Democrats have tended to focus their funding threats on rising tuition costs and student loan debt. This dates back at least a decade. Here was President Barack Obama in 2012.
We can't just keep subsidizing skyrocketing tuition. We'll run out of money. So let me put colleges and universities on notice. If you can't stop tuition from going up, the funding you get from taxpayers will go down.
And frustration over tuition costs and student loan debt has only grown in America since then. So, with Americans across the political spectrum dissatisfied for different reasons, what would it take for more of us to feel like we are getting our money's worth from our tax investment in higher education? Let's start with a quick history of how the federal government got into the business of funding colleges.
The Constitution doesn't mention education.
And yet, Vanderbilt education and history professor Christopher Loss says higher education has always gotten a lift from the government.
The first colonial college was Harvard College in Massachusetts Bay in 1636.
The colonial government in Massachusetts Bay chartered Harvard and gave it 400 pounds.
But just a few years later, John Harvard donated some 700 pounds and his own book collection and his name.
For the next 100 years, colleges in the colonies were mostly funded privately and were the place wealthy white young men trained to become the business owners, ministers, and founders of a new nation.
After the American Revolution, educational institutions increased pretty dramatically. And the big turning point is during the American Civil War with the passage of the Land Grant Act.
So President Lincoln, in search of a political win, signed the Morrill Land Grant Act, giving 30,000 acres of land per congressional delegate. States would sell the land and designate a portion of the proceeds to endow a college focused on agriculture or military science or mechanical arts. So if there's an A&T or A&M or any kind of ag college in your state, it's probably a land-grant university. And this, says Loss, is the point where the federal government starts to consider itself a serious benefactor of higher education, even begins to fund some of the agricultural research happening at these land-grant schools.
But it's really not until the crisis of World War II that the development of what we come to know as the Federal Academic Research Matrix, more ominously known as the military-industrial complex, takes shape to help the United States and the Allies win the war.
And the funding increase is massive. At the start of World War II, the federal government was spending $70 million a year on research at universities. But the urgent need for high-tech weapons and ultimately the atomic bomb sent research funding into the stratosphere.
During World War II, the federal government spent upwards of $4 billion.
57 times what the government was spending before the war.
On the Manhattan Project, as you mentioned, which is one of the big-ticket items. Also, the radiation laboratory work that developed radar and sonar, MIT leading the way there. But then there were also thousands of other contracted projects, anti-malarial drugs and penicillin and proximity fuses and all kinds of, amazing technological advances that literally changed the course of the war and changed the course of the relationship between the federal government and higher education after the war and the fighting stopped.
And it wasn't just research funding. During the Great Depression, the government, under FDR's New Deal, also began to dabble in paying for young people to go to college through the federal work-study program.
And some 700,000 students made use of the work-study program during the worst years of the Great Depression.
And the benefit to the country was what of spending that tax dollar? So what was the justification with FDR and the New Deal?
So the education, the idea of sort of college going is that it creates educated citizens. It helps with career training, and then it helps with sort of culture, contributing to the arts, contributing to the way we live our lives.
And during the Depression, it was also a way to keep young, unemployed people engaged and productive while jobs were scarce. Then the U.S. government went even bigger with the GI Bill that helped 8 million World War II veterans get degrees and training.
That opens up this idea of education as sort of a key gateway to upward mobility and middle-class existence.
And from that point on, American tax dollars were firmly enmeshed in higher education. More fellowships and loans for students in defense-related fields kicked in during the Cold War. Scholarships for low-income students, today known as Pell Grants, began in the 1960s. All the while, universities became increasingly reliant on federal research funding. And the trajectory of tax dollars in higher education went from $70 million in 1930 to $4 billion during World War II to $60 billion a year in research funding today.
To go along with $120 billion in student aid support.
And throughout the last century, Christopher Loss says there have been questions about return on that taxpayer investment. Are we giving universities too much? Are they researching the right things? Are students getting useful degrees? Are academics too liberal?
There's always political hay to be made over the politics of the college campus. But one of the remarkable things about the history of American higher education from, World War II all the way through to the very recent period is that politicians from both parties have tended to support the institution. And in large part, it's because all of them have a stake in the higher education system, regardless of what state they represent or what district they represent. Politicians like the opportunity to have their name attached to some kind of higher education legislation, in part because it was clear that you were bringing home real benefits to your constituents. And so there has always been broad public support, but there has been a downward trend over the last decade in the trust in universities, largely around the politics of higher education, the belief among some that the institution is a liberal indoctrination machine. The second is around the cost of going to college and the debt crisis, which has been very well publicized. So I think those twin events have really raised serious doubts about higher education in our own time.
That was Christopher Loss, a professor of education and history at Vanderbilt University, author of the book Between Citizens and the State: The Politics of American Higher Education in the 20th Century. So if this is a moment of reckoning, a chance to renegotiate the terms of our taxpayer investment in higher education, what should our demands be?
It's not the role of the university to issue statements on systemic racism. It's not the role of the university to issue statements on foreign conflicts that are going on.
I think that universities would be well served by trying to move towards something close to all of the research being that, at least that is federally funded, being things that plainly would command strong majorities.
Coming up next here on Top of Mind, we'll probe some of the most prominent criticism of the current state of things. This is the BYU Radio Podcast Network. I'm Julie Rose. Hey friends, I would like to take just a moment and introduce you to another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. It's The Lisa Show. Lisa Valentine Clark is the host. She's a comedian, actress, believer, single mom. And the show delves into the multitude of challenges that shape our lives, whether it's parenting, mental health questions, social issues. Lisa and the Council of Moms will tackle it and do it with a lot of laughs along the way as we attempt to figure out this thing called life. So check out The Lisa Show. Listen wherever you get podcasts. The criticism of higher education in America today seems to fall into three broad categories. First, we've got concerns around whether college is a good deal for young people in America. The second are ideological concerns about universities being too liberal in their teaching and policies. And the third category centers on concerns about whether the research being done with billions of taxpayer dollars is truly serving the country. Let's start with the ideological stuff, since that is what we're hearing about most in this moment.
Hi, my name is Rainey Mukherjee. I'm a fellow at the Manhattan Institute.
The Manhattan Institute is a conservative think tank. It's home to some of the most outspoken critics of the U.S. system of higher education. And Mukherjee says the problems are most pronounced at elite schools.
Harvard, Columbia, the University of Pennsylvania, etc. There has been a shift in focus from educating students, young American citizens, for the public good, for the pursuit of truth and knowledge, and a much greater focus on advocating particular progressive viewpoints. I think the most sort of coherent, explicit example to give, both in terms of just what we've seen and what is really been focused on by the Republican Party, are diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, or DEI for short. And certain aspects of these DEI policies that have gotten the most attention, for example, from the Trump administration in seeking to take away federal funding from these schools is first, the use of racial preferences in admissions. That, of course, reached a peak in 2023 with the decision in Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, that Supreme Court case that banned the use of these preferences. But it's also rampant in faculty hiring. So that's sort of a second prong. And I think, a third thing to focus on is of actual enforcement of disciplinary codes on school campuses. So the Trump administration, in revoking federal funds from Columbia, for instance, stated that one of the main reasons for doing so had to do with the fact that student disciplinary codes at the university were not enforced, for example, when there were campus encampments, when you had certain Jewish students saying that they were feeling attacked, both harassed verbally and physically. So I think that the DEI is a prominent example of what is going on here.
Okay, so let me just be real clear here. Do you support the president's efforts, withholding research money, for example, withholding federal funds as leverage to compel a university to change its campus policies, to change whether it's protest policies to change its hiring policies, and even to change what it's teaching in classrooms.
So sure, I'll answer that question in two parts. The first being that I do support President Trump and the Trump administration's broader efforts to, frankly, in my view, get the universities to stop doing things that are simply unlawful, to say, you're not entitled to this money. This is money that is given to you via grants, for example, dependent on whether you are following the law, that you're not discriminating on the basis of race in admissions or hiring, et cetera. I do think that is something that Republicans have called for quite some time, but it has really not been done to this degree. And so I do support that broader effort of holding universities accountable. Another example I think of this, and I think that has motivated the Trump administration and Republicans, is the treatment of Jewish students on these campuses in the aftermath of Hamas's attacks against Israel on October 7th. I think it's been documented widely, both in the December 5th, 2023 anti-Semitism hearings held by the House Committee on Education and Workforce, as well as Jewish students going on social media, going on, news shows documenting their experience, that they feel as though they are being discriminated against and harassed. I think that the Trump administration saying, such discrimination on the basis of national origin, as well as these universities' sort of refusal to enforce disciplinary codes that they already have on the books to protect Jewish students. That, I think, explains a lot of the motivation behind the revocation of federal funds. And again, that's something that I support.
Do you have concerns about what's being taught in classrooms? Do you think it's appropriate for whether it's the president or the federal government to be saying, "Hey, we want you to teach this way in schools about these things, and if you don't, we're going to withhold your funding"?
Mm-hmm. So I think that there's that has been such a topic of conversation here, and I think something. A differentiation point to bring up is this idea of institutional neutrality on political and social topics. It's not the role of the university to issue statements on systemic racism. It's not the role of the university to issue statements on foreign conflicts that are going on. Now, that has nothing to say about what individual faculty members can write about, can speak about. That's not to say what individual students can ask questions about, et cetera.
Okay, so it's inappropriate for a university and to make a statement about systemic racism, but it would not be it's not a problem then for federal funding to go to that university if there are faculty members who are expressing their opinions about systemic racism being a problem in America. That's sort of the natural extension of this, right? Mm-hmm. To say, well, but we also don't want students to be indoctrinated, quote unquote, with these viewpoints in the classroom. And if you do that, we should withhold our money because it's our tax money and we don't like what you're teaching.
I think a lot of the rhetoric surrounding this, the reporting, has focused on the fact that federal funding is being stripped from these universities simply because you have, for example, someone in a university's political science department teaching critical race theory from the 1980s, teaching critical legal studies. I think that's where a lot of the focus has been. And it makes sense. That might be a way to sort of rile up a particular political base. But I think at the end of the day, and this is evidenced even in the conditions of agreement reached by, for example, Harvard and the Trump administration, Columbia and the Trump administration, it's to say, we're not going to use racial preferences and we're going to report our data on the racial breakdown of applicants. We are going to do away with mandatory DEI statements in faculty hiring. We are going to have oversight, making sure Jewish students feel safe. That's actually what has happened. I don't, in fact, think, to say you can't teach this particular thing is actually the true reason these things are being canceled.
So back to the idea of, are we getting our money's worth, right? The return on our investment as taxpayers. How would you describe the correct return?
What taxpayers should call for now is that at the end of the day, the objective of the contemporary American university is the pursuit and furtherance of knowledge. And that is really what we should be focused on. Now, how that looks practically involves, in my opinion, ideological diversity, for example. It's been documented that there is a dearth of moderate and conservative faculty members at a lot of these schools. It's important to have professors from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all viewpoints. So it's as important to have perhaps a conservative political science professor as it is to have a progressive political science professor.
How do we get that without some sort of affirmative action, though? You know, if you're not going to give some preference, I mean, wouldn't that be the best way to get there? Would be to say, look, this is what we're looking for, and we're going to give preference based on lots of different things, and one of them is viewpoint diversity.
So I think that, up until recently, both elite universities and then also, public state research institutions, for example, did require many candidates to issue a diversity statement to make sure you include how you in this job, not just in the humanities, but for something such as biology, et cetera, how will you write about how you would further diverse voices? So that in and of itself, it's not an explicit quote unquote preference, like, oh, I want someone progressive, but you kind of are recruiting more progressives for that role simply by requiring the fact to talk about your views on diversity, your views on equity and inclusion. And I think, there are many people like me that do have more of a right of center conservative perspective, but, perhaps feel nervous to apply to these positions, but are interested in teaching students and doing engaging research and are also, interested in going back and forth with their progressive colleagues, but might not feel as though these opportunities are open to them. And so I do think, rather than creating more policies that give preference on the basis of different ideas or characteristics, perhaps we just do away with them altogether and encourage sort of a broader pipeline, I would say.
Thank you for your time, Renu Mukherjee. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
She's a fellow focused on higher education at the conservative Manhattan Institute. Let's look now at concerns about the return on our tax investment in research being done at universities. As we heard earlier, it's happening to the tune of $60 billion a year. And it has led to inventions that touch every part of our lives, from the creation of the internet, to the technology that powers our smartphones, to the knowledge that made it possible to create a vaccine for COVID-19 in record time during the pandemic. Now, the Trump administration's efforts to cancel federal funding for research that it deems too ideological remain under court review. But there is some less partisan criticism of the system that we don't hear as much about, and I found it interesting. I think it's worth exploring. When I reached out to Colum Clark at the George W. Bush Institute SMU Economic Growth Initiative to talk this through, he first wanted to make really clear that he and his organization are fans of higher education.
And wants to see them succeed, not to take shots at them or somehow undermine them. But I also believe that the higher ed sector has come to a crossroads, that it's in a kind of crisis of public confidence and in need of a good bit of overdue reform and modernization.
Clark says the mostly unwritten contract governing how universities are supposed to use American taxpayer dollars has broken down.
My simple argument is that as a high-level generalization, I think universities kind of moved gradually away from the idea that came with a very clear set of responsibilities and accountability, and moved towards the idea that it was a kind of entitlement, that they were, doing big things in the world and they were sort of entitled to the money.
So this contract that he's talking about dates back to the end of World War II, when U.S. leaders decided to keep on funding universities as the nation's primary research engine. And Clark says it was unwritten
because the leaders of the major research institutions that were going to receive this big federal funding, if you just look at what they had actually done in the war, they plainly believed that the institutions they led were, in effect, American institutions with a mission to help and advance the interests of the United States. And the research was going to be organized in such a way that if it worked, if it produced useful results, that those results would directly advance the well-identified interests and goals of the American people.
So the two components of the deal, according to Clark, were universities are American institutions doing work that clearly benefits the American people, which seems kind of obvious. But Clark says today, neither of those things is a given.
I think one thing that happened is the universities a whole lot of which are public institutions controlled ultimately by state legislatures, and some of which are nonprofit private institutions like a Harvard or a Columbia or a Yale or Princeton. But in both cases, I think that for a lot of complicated reasons, they became kind of big, complex institutions that to some degree were more of a business than before. So as one friend put it to me, a lot of them are really kind of like an amalgamation of sometimes three different businesses, which are very different from each other. One is trying to run an kind of traditional academic enterprise. One is trying to run, in many cases, a big hospital system, medical complex. And a third, increasingly, is running a big quasi-professional sports program. In all of these things, as I think the institutions grew ever larger and were granted kind of a lot of autonomy by state legislatures, I think the priorities subtly shifted in the direction of, they're not strictly speaking profit-maximizing institutions, so I can't quite say maximizing profit, but I could say maybe financial considerations loomed larger.
And Clark says you can see that in a lot of decisions, like the fact that U.S. universities are admitting double the number of international students they were 20 years ago. Those numbers have dipped recently because of Trump administration policies that consider international students a threat to the U.S. economy and national security. But Clark's concern is that the overall trend toward accepting more international students is a step away from the mission of serving American interests.
The dirty secret is that essentially almost all those students are full pay.
Whereas very few American students pay full tuition thanks to decades of political pressure to make college more affordable.
And when you've been extending ever more tuition assistance, tuition breaks to the domestic population, it kind of becomes sort of attractive to quietly raise the fraction that is full pay by, taking scarce slots and giving them to foreign students. I'm not trying to make a nativist argument that didn't bring benefits as well, but it's part of it.
Clark also points to the increasing inclination among universities to take funding from foreign governments as another step away from the unwritten agreement that these are American institutions operating in the interest of Americans.
For example, the Chinese government, or from, in some cases, there have been pretty large grants from Middle Eastern governments. And if the federal government is pouring money into an institution, and then meanwhile they're taking additional money and making some kind of a quid pro quo, if you will. What funds what? It's sort of an impossible question to answer. What I can say is that if you go back to the 1950s or early 1960s or something, and you went to the Ivy League or leading state flagship institutions at that time, and you said, okay, the federal taxpayers are going to give you X dollars. How do we feel about you taking some additional dollars from the Soviet Union? And you'll put that project over on the side, right? I mean, you won't use the American dollars to fund the KGB project. I'm being kind of deliberately provocative because at the time, like 99% of people would say, no way in the world will we tolerate that. I'm not saying that, the China of today is exactly the Soviet Union of the 1950s or 1960s, but attitudes about taking in such funds have changed pretty dramatically inside a lot of our institutions.
On the university research front, Cullum Clark points to a study published in 2023 in the journal Nature, which analyzed more than 45 million academic papers across a range of science and engineering fields with this question in mind.
To what degree was it breakthrough science that changes our understanding of the nature of the universe and creates the basis for, radical new products that will change human life for the better and so forth, versus at the other extreme, to what degree is it pretty much confirming what we already know, like very, very incremental at best. And across every field of science and engineering, it was a big diagonal line downwards over the last several decades. The breakthrough nature of the science has gone down. Now, it's true that you can go through extended periods where we've kind of like picked the low-hanging fruit, and the remaining questions as identified at a particular point in time are harder. But here's the thing. All those diagonal lines are right on top of each other in that paper. Physics, chemistry, biology, electrical engineering, they all go down together. I mean, it's a little hard to believe that we've plucked all the low-hanging fruit in all of them. What's a little more likely, the authors speculate, and I'm inclined to agree, is the whole hiring and advancement system and also the system for winning grants from the federal government has become increasingly skewed towards do the safe thing. Do the thing the thing that's good for your career will be to do work that sort of like when you're young and you're probably at your most creative point in your career, as oftentimes is the case with scientists, are you going to do the thing that basically just sort of confirms what your advisor or other prominent people in the field already did, because that's the safe path to advancement? Or are you going to do the thing that is a little more controversial, out there, bold, could change the world more? You might fall on your face. To what degree have the incentives changed? And these authors believe they've changed a lot. And as I get out there and talk to people, they sort of say, yeah, we probably really should recalibrate on that front.
Okay, so rehabilitating this social contract, according to Clark, would mean researchers taking more risks that could lead to new innovation, less foreign influence on universities, and less focus on maximizing revenue. As for what specifically universities should be studying with public money, Clark says,
my advice is pretty simple. Try to do things that will command a supermajority of support from the people in your state, from your donors, the voters, your state government, the national government. Try to run things in such a way that when it's not President Trump and it's somebody else, you don't have to make a giant lurching change, because you didn't totally go down the road of trying to please one party, and then the other party comes in and you're, kind of out of luck, and now you have to change everything to try to please the other party. I hope on that, I'm not saying to the university president, keep this project but kill that one. I'm saying think a little bit about, your mission and kind of which hills you die on, which fights you're ready to pick, what actually matters a lot to you. Because you do have a public trust. If you don't want to take the federal money, then knock yourself out. I believe in a free country, right? If you don't want to take federal money, run it however the heck you want, and if you can get private donors to support it, power to you.
Cullum Clark is an adjunct professor of economics at Southern Methodist University and director of the George W. Bush Institute SMU Economic Growth Initiative. So what does a university that's a good deal for taxpayers and for students look like?
It's a place of upward mobility for students of modest means, and they also do a terrific job on helping their students vote, getting them into healthcare, nursing, and other professions where we have shortages. Just an all-around winner.
A different way to rank colleges worthy of our investment is next here on Top of Mind from the BYU Radio Podcast Network. I'm Julie Rose. Hey friends, if you are looking for another great show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts, check out Constant Wonder. Host Marcus Smith takes you on an exhilarating journey through captivating stories of our magnificent natural world. You'll gain profound insight into different facets of our planet, discover more about nature, and maybe even ponder your connection to Earth's wonder. The show is Constant Wonder, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Look, the Trump administration is kind of making the same mistake that everyone else has made over the years in a different way. They're really focusing their ire and their punishment on elite universities. Elite universities aren't where the action is.
This is Paul Glastris again. He's editor-in-chief of the Washington Monthly Magazine, which publishes an alternative college ranking list every year, challenging the idea that the best in the nation are the most selective and expensive.
We think the hierarchy that exists is mularchy. Whatever's happened at Harvard's happened. It's not that relevant to the average person. But if you want to stick it to the left and make elite liberals squirm, you go after those schools. Look, there's a legitimate debate about what kinds of courses are being taught, what the ideology is, and so forth. If Congress and the president want to together pass some legislation that says the government has the right to go through the curriculums of different universities and, titrate how much money they get based on some kind of formula, and that can pass muster with the courts, I wouldn't support it, but at least it'd be constitutional, right? One man sitting atop a government choosing which colleges to punish. I can't, for the life of me, understand why any American would want that.
And it's distracting from the real problem with higher education in America, says Glastris.
The average student is going to a regional public university. The average regional public university gets $1,000 less in government money than the average flagship big state school.
Per student or?
Per student. $1,000 less, and a half or a quarter of what the average student at an elite school is getting. And that's where most students get their education. I would like to see the entire focus of higher education taken away from the Harvards and toward the schools where most of us are going, to make them have enough funding and enough good organization, good governance, so that they can be like the schools at the top of the Washington Monthly rankings, which are providing upward mobility to average Americans, which is the thing that's missing in this country, which is the reason Donald Trump got elected, because people are angry that they're economically stuck. You want to unstick the average American. One of the things you can do is offer them free or low price, high quality, higher education. And you're not going to get that by tweaking the course curriculum at Harvard. That's got nothing to do with the problem.
So here is what's different about the Washington Monthly college rankings. Instead of rewarding schools for exclusivity, prestige, and wealth,
our rankings are best seen as which colleges are doing right by the country, because we think our metrics reflect what it is taxpayers, elected officials, policymakers want out of their investment. Number one, upward mobility, the ability of average people to get into or stay into the middle class. Number two, research. I think we all agree, most people anyway, that colleges are places that create the scholarship and the scholars that drive economic growth, human flourishing, the solution to national and global problems, that this sort of American research university is one of the great foundations of our national strength and importance to the world. And third, what we call service, but what really is democratic engagement. Colleges that have robust ROTC programs, right? The programs that train officers for the different services. Colleges that send their graduates onto the Peace Corps. Colleges that make it easy for their students to vote. Colleges that send students into socially valuable but somewhat undercompensated professions like teaching and healthcare and so forth. So that's the three things that we measure: upward mobility, research, and service.
And the result is a very different list. Take California State Fresno. It's number 2 on Washington Monthly's best colleges for your tuition and tax dollars, while U.S. News ranks it 183rd.
I love Fresno State. Fresno State is in Fresno, which is the heart of the agricultural powerhouse of California. It's also pockmarked with quite serious poverty. Most of the students who go to Fresno State are from within that region. And the president himself grew up on a farm in the area, and they have very low tuition. So it's a place of upward mobility for students of modest means, some of whom wind up running the agricultural companies where they grew up picking crops. That's the kind of place that it is. And they also do a terrific job on helping their students vote, getting them into healthcare, nursing, and other professions where we have shortages, and just an all-around winner.
Given all that you've said about the criteria here, I was really surprised to see Princeton land as number 5, an Ivy school. What on earth is it doing at the top of the Washington Monthly rankings?
Well, it's not so strange. If you look at the top 30, about half of them are Ivy League or Ivy League type colleges. And the reason for that is, first of all, if you're a student of modest means and you can get into these colleges, your chances of earning really shoot up, right? Nothing like an Ivy League education to get you a job on Wall Street. Number 2, these universities have massive endowments in the billions of dollars. And so they can afford, if they let such a student in, and that's the big if, to cover their entire costs. They're that wealthy. So a school like Princeton honestly doesn't do that well in letting in students of modest means, but it does better than other elite universities. And when those students get there, they get a free ride. So So, it's not like we're dunking on the elite. If you can get into a college like that, more power to you. But those are universities that educate 2%, 5%, 10%, depending on where you make the cutoff of what elite is of the country. What about the other 95% of students, right? Those are the schools that are largely ignored by the other rankings that we're trying to put a spotlight on with our different criteria.
Paul Glastris is editor-in-chief of Washington Monthly. Okay, so I'm sure you're wondering at this point, which school is number one in the magazine's ranking? Well, it's Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. And if you've never heard of it, join the club. Jordan Shands hadn't heard of it either, and he grew up really close by.
It's literally from Jessamine County. It's a 30-minute drive. And my choir teacher was actually the one that told me about it because she was a Berea alum. And when she told me about, I was completely because I was like, I'm getting out of this small town stuff because I cannot stay here. I need to go somewhere where when she said Berea and where it was, I was like, I'm thinking KKK. I'm thinking that this is going to be a really bad environment for me. But I was like, well, if she went there, she's African-American. I was like, it couldn't have been that bad, if she went there. So, I went down there for a visit with my mom and did a whole walk around campus and everything. And as soon as I set foot on campus, I knew that's where I needed to go.
Okay, so backing up just a tiny bit, Jordan Shands grew up outside of Lexington, Kentucky, and he's mixed race.
My father's Black, my mom's white. And neither of my parents graduated from college. I'm the oldest of 6. So my family was very adamant on all the kids getting some type of higher education, even though they didn't go. My dad's a Marine. My mom and dad actually are both cosmetologists. And so we just didn't have the financial resources to pay for college.
Were you looking for a way out of Kentucky?
Yeah, I was actually a kid that was dead set on moving to California for the longest time. I mean, I had always loved the California music, the vibe, and everything. Mm-hmm. And so my whole life, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a professional singer and everything. And it wasn't until once I started applying for colleges, that's where it kind of hit me where I was like, probably not gonna be the best move for a 17-year-old kid to just move out there and not have any family out there with me. And even if I do go to college out there, I'm not gonna be able to afford it.
So he adjusted his plan and set his heart on Kentucky State, an HBCU, historically Black university in Lexington. And by the spring of his senior year, he had an acceptance letter. But even with the financial aid package he was offered, Shands would leave college about $30,000 in debt. Then his high school choir teacher said, hey, you should think about my alma mater, Berea College.
When my parents found out that there was a school where I could literally go and get a high quality education, seeing just how much opportunity they give their students without putting them in debt, my parents were like, yeah, this is where you need to go. And that tuition promise helped me graduate debt free.
And find his true calling in life, which we'll get back to in just a second. But here's the deal with Berea College. It's small, about 1,500 students, and charges 0 tuition.
We were founded before the Civil War by an abolitionist minister. So Berea is the first interracial co-educational college in the South.
This is Berea College President Cheryl Nixon.
We have as our motto, God has made of one blood all peoples of the earth. A biblical quote from our founder. So the idea of all people are welcome into education was there from day one, and wanting to erase all barriers possible. Over time, we went tuition free in 1892. So no tuition at all, saying we are going to try a completely different model that is now called a federal work college model. So we accept Pell eligible students only. For our students, that usually means the family income is under $40,000 to $50,000 a year.
Why would you only want to accept Pell eligible students?
Because our mission is to open the doors of opportunity to education for students that deserve it and might have, again, economic barriers. And the way we do like to frame this is that our students bring great gifts to us, their talents, their strengths, their curiosities, their academic hopes and dreams. And we want to give them a gift in return, which is to say, we will give you the maximum amount of financial aid that we can. We don't want you to have to worry about cost as part of education.
What percentage of applicants are you able to admit?
So we admit around 30% of the applicants that apply to us. So that's, not the most selective in the nation, but highly selective.
Let's talk about how Berea pulls this off. So explain to me what you mean by no tuition.
An easy way to think about this is that we are looking to cover all of the costs. We are trying to get our students down to paying zero for their education. Okay. So our funding includes federal aid, that's a Pell Grant. We also are a work college. So federally, work colleges are a very unique kind of what we call a sub-report or subversion of work study, where what students do is they work a certain number of hours. Every student on campus must do this. If you're a work college, every student, the entire student body participates in this. Our students are working 10 hours a week.
Okay.
Those work positions are meant to be educational positions where you're educating yourself in career pathways, and service positions where we have students who do work in our community, where it's volunteer types of work, where they're tutoring in local middle schools, they're working at a local food bank, and they're getting work college funding that goes directly towards their tuition.
Right. And if you were to look at the pie, again, because I'm thinking about taxpayer investment versus what you're covering kind of on your own. So it does half of what Berea needs to pull this off come from the federal government?
About 25% would be coming from sort of federal funding. And then the bulk of the expenses are paid by our endowment. We have a large endowment that spins off returns, and we use the returns from our investment to pay for all of these expenses we're talking about. And then the last thing I'll say is we have fundraising every year. We do fundraising. We ask donors to give funding that goes directly towards scholarships for students also.
What are the most popular majors at Berea?
So the most popular majors are computer science, business. We have nursing that's very popular. A lot of students are very interested in serving the public good. It goes back to a bit of what I said earlier. We have students that want to be teachers. They want to be social workers. They see a need in our areas for supporting local communities, whether that's in Appalachia, Kentucky, the broader southern region, needs good teachers, needs good nurses, needs social workers, needs community healthcare workers that offer counseling services. 65% of our student body is from Kentucky and Appalachia. When we look at our alumni, 72% of our alumni stay in Kentucky and Appalachia. They stay to serve this region. And that's the narrative of higher education. I think I want us to remember that that's a big piece of higher ed, is giving back to the knowledge wealth or the intellectual wealth of our country, giving back also in the form of volunteerism, of making sure that we do prepare students for lives of going into service-oriented careers. So that Washington Monthly emphasized that type of value, the public good value of higher ed. I would say that's what we are most proud of.
Here's how that played out for Jordan Shands, who graduated in 2015. First of all, Berea turned out to be a more diverse place than Shands had ever experienced growing up in rural Kentucky. Half of Berea's campus is students of color.
I hadn't seen this many students of color before. And so I was like, man, I'm going to meet people from all across the country and all across the world going to this small little backwoods school. Even though I'm a male of color, that was a culture shock for sure. I was like, oh, okay, cool. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Shands started out as a music major, aiming for a career in R&B. But the work college aspect of Berea that requires every student to have a part-time job changed his plans.
I became a student ambassador. So that's where I was doing tours. And that's actually where I kind of started falling in love with the higher education position and working in higher ed. Because I was taking students on tours, I was having to do research on the school and be able to share all these different facts and everything. And so that's where I really started to get into my passion of higher ed.
So he switched his major from vocal performance to African American studies. And after graduation, he got a job as an admissions counselor for Berea College. Then he hired on with a state agency coordinating financial aid for college-bound kids in Kentucky before opting to take a job at Lafayette, which is a public high school in Lexington. Now, Jordan Shan says that would not have even been a viable option for him if he'd had student loan debt to worry about.
And for the 4 years that I was at Lafayette, I mean, it was amazing. Like every student that I worked with either went to college, went to the military, or went into like a trade field. And something that I started my second year at Lafayette was a boys mentor program because I had something like that at Berea. It was called Black Male Leadership Initiative at Berea. And I started a program at Lafayette called Brothers that focused on mentorship of young men to like really have those real life conversations that they may or may not have at home.
It's one of his proudest achievements. And now Jordan Shands runs a college test prep business in Lexington with plans to expand.
Being able to be a positive outlook for students who look like me and who, come from similar backgrounds as me, I think that was a passion of mine that I wanted to keep close to home. And I definitely think it was something that helped me realize that, I can make this impact here and still be able to do my dream of, being a singer, songwriter while I'm here in Kentucky. Because two of my songs actually were on Tyler Perry's show, Sisters, this last month. So that was something else that Berea taught me, was that you're not just good at one thing. You can have these different careers and, make a living doing them and not have to worry about paying bills at the same time. So, yeah. And I've always been somebody who, has said not every kid is built for college, but education should be an opportunity for anyone and everyone. It shouldn't come at, such a high price. And I think for me, that's why Berea is such a standout. And the reason why Berea is so different from every other institution is that it provides that for, students who have always wanted to go to college and for students who may not have thought college was an option for them because they were never told it was an option.
You're a great ambassador. Jordan, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it for your insights.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Jordan Shands graduated from Berea College in 2015, and he is now the administrator of Ultimate Test Prep in Lexington, Kentucky. Did you go to college? Did it pay off for you? What about for the country? Until working on this episode, I never realized just how much the average taxpayer is spending on higher education. $1,700 a year is a lot. And I'm one of these get my money's worth kind of people. If I go to an amusement park, I'm going to stay till it closes. All-you-can-eat buffets are a disaster for me. So this question of what return are we getting from our higher education investment has been an interesting one for me to chew on. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email topofmind@byu.edu or reach out on social media. We are at topofmindpod to continue the conversation. And if you know somebody who might be interested in this episode, please click to share it now. That's the best way for us to grow our audience and include more people in this effort to become better citizens, kinder neighbors, and more effective advocates. Top of Mind is a BYU radio production. Today's episode was produced by Abby Karras and me with help from Alex Larson, Sam Payne, and Samuel Benson. Our sound designer is Hayden Thompson. I'm Julie Rose. We'll talk soon.